so excited to welcome and introduce our host and panelists for this session. We've got Patty Hagar, Vice President of SMB Solutions Engineering at Salesforce, Kelsey Frost, Director of Solutions Engineering Americas and APAC at ClickUp, Karthik Krishna, Manager of Solutions Engineering at Freshworks, and Lindsay Hawkshurst, Senior Manager of Solutions Engineering at Salesforce. Get ready to take notes, folks. It's off to you, Patty. Oh, Patty, hold on. Hi, Kelsey. There you go, Patty.
Hello. Can you see me okay and hear me okay?
You look great. You sound great.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let's wrap this incredible virtual conference with a wonderful topic, which is getting started in year one. First of all, I just want to do a quick round with our panelists. I'll start with you, Lindsay. When, how, why did you get into leadership?
So nice to meet everyone. My name is Lindsay Hawkshurst. As Courtney mentioned, I work at Salesforce with Patty, and I'm a pretty new convert, I guess, to leadership. I started this leadership role in March of this year. So this is still all really pretty new to me. But I decided I wanted to go into leadership. I think it was 8 or 9 years ago. I had a really fantastic manager that really helped me chart the course of my career. I actually wasn't all that happy with what I was doing. I was in customer success at the time, and she sat down with me and we wrote out every one of my job functions and what brought me joy and what didn't, and really changed the trajectory of my career. In that case, it was moving away from that specific career, but I knew that was the type of person and leader that I wanted to be able to do that for other people, help up level them, figure out what they're good at, what makes them happy. And she just set a really, really great example for me.
That's so awesome. A lot of people can see it in you before you even see it in yourself. So thanks for sharing. Karthik, how about you?
Thanks, Patty. Hello, everyone. Take care. So, I actually don't have an interesting story here because
Karthik, your audio, excuse me, your audio is a little hard to hear.
Is it better now?
Not, it needs to be louder. Yeah.
I'll probably come next.
Okay, why don't we punt, go over to Kelsey and we'll get you. Okay, Kelsey.
Yeah, hey Patty. Nice to meet everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Kelsey. As Courtney mentioned, I'm the Director of Solutions Engineering at ClickUp. So for me, leadership started a number of years ago. It was something that I had considered, but not seriously considered at the time. And I think, like Lindsay, it was a conversation with my manager at the time that really got me thinking more seriously about it. And for me, I loved being a sales engineer, a solutions engineer, whatever you call it. I really liked working with customers, working with the sales team, and really focusing on deals. But I was also thinking about, where does that take me in the future, and what are the ways that I can scale impact? And I was really excited about contributing to process, contributing to mentoring others. And so it was something that I considered, that I dabbled in, and then ultimately made the move over probably about five years ago now.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Kelsey. Karthik, how are you doing audio-wise?
I think I'm okay. Is my audio?
Yes, coming through clearly, sir. Okay.
Thank you, Patty. Hello, everyone. Good morning. This is Karthik Krishna here from Freshworks. So for me, the step into being a people manager started when I started looking out at different challenges, right? So when you're an IC, you've been giving demos, talking to customers, and like Kelsey said, what's next? What are the next challenges that you would want to overcome, right? So I actually was interested in getting work done through people or through influence rather than just getting work done through me, because I feel that's where the challenge lies, right? So I felt that was interesting for me, and I just wanted to give it a shot, and that's why I'm here. I'm still trying to explore. So yeah, that's my story.
Thank you. We'll hear more about that story in a moment. For you all on the conference, the virtual conference, as Courtney said, my name's Patty Hagar. I've been in leadership, let's just say many decades. We'll leave it at that. And I feel like it's kind of like how Lindsay said, like my manager was seeing that I enjoyed mentoring and I was really just raising my hand to enable other folks that were onboarding. And I think I got more joy out of that than just my own day-to-day recognition, because I was kind of in flow mode. I was like, I've mastered this job. What else can I do? So it's so interesting to hear your story. So I appreciate that. Let's start with our first question, which goes to Lindsay. And it's, what are the most critical skills and experiences someone should focus on when preparing for a leadership role? And Lindsay, I love this going over to you because you're year one.
Yeah, did a lot of preparing very recently. So I would say, when I was sort of brainstorming about this, I would say one of the most important things that really benefited me while I was preparing and also in this first year in leadership from a skills perspective is really practicing solving for the system or the situation that created the problem, as opposed to specifically just the problem in front of you. So, like, for example, my team, my larger team this year experienced a lot of leave of absence sort of all at the same time. So we were working with very few solution engineers with a very large sales team. And instead of trying to individually cover the deals or cover the individual AEs or sales managers, we started to think about, how do we think about this systematically? Because we can cover each individual deal, but this problem isn't going away. And so we developed a queue system that would work not just today, but for any future LOA or PTO, et cetera, that came up in the future. And so I've really tried to just put that to practice, that when I see a problem and I start analyzing it, really try to think about the root cause of it and trying to solve for that systemically is really great practice as a leader. As an IC, I feel like you get a lot of problems that you can sort of solve one off. But, when you're leading a team, you really want to be putting systems in place that is going to avoid the problem altogether. And so that was really impactful for me and something that I was able to practice as an individual contributor and then have really put into practice since starting this role.
I love that. Kartik, how about you? I know you had some other points to share.
Sure, Patty. So for me, I would probably start with putting out a quick development plan, right? Because when someone wants to move into leadership, not everyone starts at the same point. People come from different experiences. They start at different points. So I would probably start with a development plan, talk to your mentor, talk to your leader to see what are those skills that you need to acquire, because it's not like you see a job listing for a manager and you start preparing for it, right? You just need to make sure that when the opportunity arises, you're in the best position to make yourself that person, right? So that is what I would probably say. So everyone, I would personally recommend is to have something called as high agency, right? So the ability to execute and get things done, because as an SE, you would know how to get things done because you've been doing that day in, day over. But when you have a team, you'll have to influence. So probably work on stretch assignments, projects where you own outcomes, but ultimately make sure that anything that improves your circle of influence and ultimately your branding would definitely be helpful. So any experience that could offer that is the best place to start for you.
I always say, like, do the job you aspire to do, right? Like, what better dress rehearsal than to try to do the job that you're trying to go for? I love that term, high agency. That's pretty interesting. Excellent. Let's pivot. So this one will go to Kartik as well. How can aspiring leaders effectively establish connections with key stakeholders and other leaders as they're trying to go into this leadership journey?
Perfect. So this is one of the favorite questions that is for me. So actually, when you're trying to establish connections, it starts out when you are an IC itself. It's not that something that you will have to start when you're aspiring to be a people leader. So given the nature of the pre-sales role, it's a cross-functional role. You work with the product team, you work with the supporting functions, your sales stakeholders. So you'll have to start cultivating and establishing the relationships right from the get-go. So when you're aspiring to be a people leader, you just reinforce those relationships and leverage those relationships so that it's easier for you when you transition into that role, right? So, but there are also some of the, I would say, best practices or something that I would ask people to keep in mind is that when you're establishing connections, make them authentic. Just don't let it be transactional, because that relationship has to sustain. So do what it makes to make it very organic and sustainable is what I would say.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, because actually I mentor a lot of individuals. One of my huge passions is women in STEM. So I have a lot of women reach out to me through organizations I'm in. And I actually reach out to be mentored as well. Like, even if you're at a VP level, you're continuing to want to go to that next level. So I've noticed over the years, there's pitfalls too with this stakeholder relationship and asking for a mentor. Like, a couple of things I'll add to what you said is, like, sometimes you'll have a mentor relationship and it may run its course. Like, don't force fit conversations if you're not gelling, if there's not a connection, because you mentioned you've got to be authentic, right? And one of the things that you can do too is keep the conversation going, not just in those quarterly sync ups, but what I notice with some of the individuals I mentor, we might talk about a topic. Right now it's generative AI, and I talk about some of the things like my company is doing. What they may do, if they see an article that's really interesting, they'll push a link to me in Slack or email. Hey, Patty, I know we talked about this. I have a few opinions about this. What do you think? And it just keeps that back and forth going. So I think that's really neat, is to continue to share information with those that are mentoring you, because we're always looking for information. The leaders don't have all the answers, right? We're loving getting feedback from our mentees. Thank you for that, Kartik. This next question is going to go to Kelsey. And it's, what types of projects or volunteer roles offer the best experiences for someone transitioning into leadership? What do you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think there are a lot of projects and experiences that are available if you're looking for them, whether they're explicitly offered or whether it's something you identify, you suggest and bring to your leader and say, hey, I think there's a need here. For identifying what the best is, that's tough. I think it really depends on the person. And I say that because I think if you're planning your own growth or you're helping someone plan their growth, you have to look at the actual career goal. I've had people that I've mentored within my org, outside of my org, that are looking to move it to management. But I wouldn't say that for each person that why is the same. For one individual, his end goal is to be able to be an executive, to be able to be a founder, to be able to be a CTO, though it's something along those lines, right? So the types of experiences to get there, while a manager within an SE org might be a step down that path, the types of experiences you want are going to differ from someone who wants to really mentor people. That's what gets them excited. That's why they want to go into leadership, is because they want to be a coach. And so I think, knowing that why, knowing not just the title, but the types of experience you want to gain is really important, and how that propels you either into the next role or, let's say, 3-5 years down the line. I know some people really struggle with looking 5 years out, but it is important to have that introspection and think, is this the right path for me? So I think then we want to look at, okay, let's say I'm really passionate about being a people leader. I want to mentor others. Then you're going to look for experiences that align to that, like new hire mentoring or helping to update onboarding content. Almost every company has new product updates that come out every year. How do you keep that fresh, relevant? The field is changing. God, you just mentioned AI, generative AI, and other types of AI. Does that come into play in how you onboard or how you create content for team members? I think there's all those aspects there. And for someone else, that type of experience, well, it may be before a formal leader role, if the interest is being able to be more at an executive level eventually, then internal cross-functional projects are going to add more value in that path than, say, mentoring a new hire. Though both are useful.
That's so many good points there. Gosh, the one thing I can say too is, like, when someone reaches out and says, I want to lead, I want to be a manager, and then all they do is say it and not act it, you know, actions speak louder than words. That's an old saying that I think has a lot of merit to it. Lindsay, you've got a real interesting perspective on this too. Tell me kind of what were some of the activities you did to tee you up.
I love this question so much because not everybody gets the chance to lead at work or all the time. I think Kelsey made a great point. There are a lot of different ways that you can get involved, but there's also a ton of ways to show and demonstrate leadership capability and passion outside of work too. So for me personally, I was lucky enough to get a chance to sort of lead a team, while there was some medical leave towards the very end of when I was an individual contributor. But the previous 5 years before that, I really focused on like mentoring high school students. There are a lot of organizations. I'm personally based in Chicago that pair us with Chicago public schools, juniors and seniors, and sort of help them through that college process, which was really great for getting exposure to folks that are earlier in their career, in flexing those mentorship skills, which was great because I now lead a small business team here at Salesforce. So folks do tend to be earlier in their career. And there are lots of different sort of activities like that. Like there's an organization called Technovation Girls where you get to work with middle school girls that are learning how to put together like a business proposal and things like that. So being able to flex those leadership and mentorship skills through pro bono work, like here at Salesforce specifically, that typically comes in the way of like helping a nonprofit implement Salesforce, and to be able to lead a project and be able to show and demonstrate how you're able to lead a team and guide a team. And then just mentoring at work. Kelsey mentioned this, but a lot of people are looking to go into solutions roles. I hear from BDRs, from AEs, from folks in customer success, and sort of taking them and helping them sort of chart their course and what their path does. All shows a potential hiring manager, how you've done the job before you actually have the title. That was said to me a lot also before I took this job. Do the job before you do it.
Yep. I love that. Well, let's go down another question path that this one's tricky. And this is really tricky, especially for new managers. But as you're getting into like a leadership role, you want to get feedback from your peers, your stakeholders, your current manager. You want to get constructive feedback. Lindsay, I'll stick with you for the moment. Like, what is the best approach for getting that constructive feedback from your peers and mentors? And, if some of the feedback is negative, like, how do you like absorb that and use it to better yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that, we recently had a leadership QBR where we sort of brought together all of the leaders in our org, and we had a whole session around this because this is not an easy topic, but you don't grow unless you are sort of getting that feedback. But we sort of reframed for us that instead of asking for feedback, so something open-ended like, how do you think I did? Or, how'd that go? Asking whoever you're asking for more for guidance. So be more specific. So like, for example, like if I want to, have better executive presence, what advice do you have for me? And then, so not only being specific, but also the person who is shadowing you or mentoring you, if you can give them the heads up before heading into the call, like, hey, I'm really working on my executive presence, or, the flow of this demo, or whatever it is that you're working on, so that person can be thinking about it while, the session is going on. They're able to give you much more tailored feedback that's actionable, because it's very easy to say, yeah, I think it went great. Like, and that doesn't really help you move the needle forward. But it sort of takes some of the heavy lifting off of the mentor of like, trying to figure out like, what this person, what would be the most impactful for you is guiding them, where you need the feedback, and then asking them specifically how to improve, change, what should you do more of, do less of. So I found that super powerful. And then in terms of negative feedback, I think Kelsey has a great perspective on this. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to her.
Okay, thanks, Lindsay. I think what you just said there too about telling someone ahead of time that you are working on something that you want feedback, that really reminded me some of the people that I have felt most comfortable giving feedback to, peers, leaders above me, people on my team as well, are people who have said that first. I think that it might not be something that everyone realizes, but it can be really disarming to know, oh, this person is working on something. They want to know my opinion, whether that's another leader, a colleague of mine saying, I'm working on my filler words. Can you send me a message every time in this meeting I use a filler word, please? Right, something as simple as that, or something a lot more in depth. But I do think opening that door makes people a lot more willing to give the feedback. Okay, negative feedback. That's why you passed it to me. Negative feedback is, I think we have to really value it. I think we have to take it really seriously. It can hurt. You can not want to give it because you're afraid of hurting something. I know a lot of people, when they first receive negative feedback, the reaction is, ow, like I don't know if I agree with that. That's harsh, but it's important. And I do believe that for most people, it's hard to give negative feedback. So if someone has gone to the effort to do it, there's a reason, and it's probably because they care. They want to help you grow. So you have to really take it seriously and then figure out what's the best way to implement that. Is it a change in your behavior? Is it a change in how you set culture? There's one time that really stuck with me from a few years ago where one of my team members in a one-on-one, I asked, do you have any feedback for me that's come up recently? And one thing he told me, which still to this day I remember, is I'm not feeling recognized. And that hurts as a leader, right? You're there to celebrate your team. From my perspective, this was a top performer on the team, someone who was helping mentor others, someone who was doing a great job. It went without saying, but I think that's the issue. It went without saying that he was a top performer on the team. So for that, you take it, realize the impact, whether it's large, whether it's small, to you, to the other person, to an entire organization, and then determine what change can and should be made. I think that's the key piece, following up and showing that you have taken that seriously by both actions, not just by words.
I love so much about these responses, because I think we've all felt like sometimes we're in these check-ins or in these conversations with AEs we work with. How did it go? Great. Do you have any feedback for me? No. And it's like, how are you growing? I have a recommendation that I have lived by for, 5 or 6 years. It's a book called Radical Candor by Kim Scott. I just popped it in the chat Q&A. So please, guys, keep the questions coming for us. But I recommend everyone get this, whether you're an IC or a manager. Like, number one, we want to ask specific questions, like both Kelsey and Lindsay said. And number two, like, don't get the defense mechanisms up, right? The number one thing with this feedback is it's going to help you grow. So try to point out too, like, it's about what the customer thought. So if you do a demo and maybe messaging doesn't resonate, or your audience has engaged, like, oftentimes, like, talking about the customer in this feedback and how the customer felt, it can help you realize it's not about you, it's about the customer and how we hit the mark or not there. So thank you so much for that. I hope to see some questions on this after we go through all the questions. Okay, Kartik, back to you. What is, I have so many I can think of when I ask this question. What is the biggest mistake you can make as a new leader? What do you think?
Yeah, Patty, I think that would make a long list. But for
Yeah.
me, the top would always be not delegating enough, right? So most of the people managers or leaders have once been rock stars or superstars, right? So they've been in a place where they can get things done. So when you transition into a people manager role, it's more about influence and how you get things done through people. So what people tend to do is they try to overhelp people or overdo work, which doesn't let you help the team or empower them, which ultimately results in not your team not growing, right? So I think that's one thing that I would definitely recommend people to be very mindful about. The other thing that I have noticed, and also probably a few others have also that I have spoken to have also said about, is sometimes new leaders tend to mimic the behavior of the leader that they work with, or probably the leaders that they've worked with, right? I mean, it could be consciously or subconsciously. So it's always important for you to identify your own style of leadership. It comes in subconsciously, but as a new manager, take your time, explore, and probably see what works for you and suit yourself with that.
Oh, I love that so much because we're all so different and that's what makes the team. Like I'm a
Yeah.
big proponent of Strength Finder, which is a process where you find your 5 unique strength themes. And like my experience is if I concentrate on my weaknesses, they're weaknesses for a reason, right? They're not natural for me. So capitalize on what you do well. And that's why you hire a team, right? Because you want to get people to compliment you. In fact, I think Lindsay has a comment on this in regards to the question around the biggest mistake you can make as a new leader. So Lindsay, jump in.
Yeah, I would say hiring well is the most important and also can at the same time be the biggest mistake you make if you do not do that. So identifying pretty much as soon as you get into the role, what does the ideal hiring profile look like for the candidates that you're searching for, as well as the hiring profile for the specific headcount that you may be looking for at that time. Is it do you need somebody who's tenured, who can hit the ground running? Do you need enthusiasm? Do you need somebody who's going to cheerlead and, be a great team player? And figuring out sort of what those qualities are in a person and then immediately start recruiting. Even if you do not have an open head count, the best thing you can do sort of in a leadership role is having someone, I think my manager said this to me when I started, if you can have somebody internally and externally that is ready to take a job as soon as a headcount open, that's the best thing that you can do for this business. It prevents gaps in coverage. It prevents, having, sales teams and solution engineers on your team having to take on far more work than they normally would, is just having people sort of ramped and ready to go. And so starting that process really as soon as possible and then continuing to nurture, until a headcount becomes available is so important. And that's also something you can practice as an individual contributor. Like my manager used to have me screen almost everybody that came onto our team or even surrounding teams in, the solutions engineering small business space. So I really built that sort of screening muscle of like, what is the hiring profile that we're looking for? And then, when it came time to interview for my role, I'd already, I didn't know everything, but I knew a lot about like sort of what we were looking for and, what the recruiting process looked like. And I think that is something 5 years ago I would not have told you is it is one of the most important parts of the job.
That's another example of like the stretch assignment, right? Like, hey, I've got cycles, let me go interview and then help, package up a hiring toolkit for your leader because oftentimes, they don't have the time to do it. That's really helpful. Kelsey, anything to add to that? Anything that you've experienced in your first year or so of leadership that's been a mistake that if you knew now, you'd do differently?
Yeah, it's there's a lot I could point to. There's a lot I could point to. I think what Lindsay said is an interesting one. I think for a lot of new leaders, if you don't have open headcount, the thought process is, well, why would I be recruiting? Why would I be looking for candidates? We'll wait till we are actually hiring because what can I offer to a candidate now? I think that's a great point, Lindsay, to always be building a bench so that you have people that are ready to be pulled in. Patty, I think in terms of back in my first year of leadership, I think one of the easiest mistakes to fall into, one of the easiest traps to fall into, is wanting to befriend the team and build trust with the team at the expense of radical candor. I think that for a new leader, especially as someone who maybe has been promoted from the team and used to be a peer of everyone, you want to prove your competence. You want to prove the respect and the trust, and it can be challenging to have the openness to give hard feedback in the first couple of months. But I think that if you delay that, then you're also eroding the foundation of trust because you've withheld perspective from someone that you did have for whatever it was, 3, 6 months, because you were waiting until the right time. And yeah, at that point, you're not helping them grow. I think that's one of the things that I see, especially with new leaders a lot, is that desire to be respected and trusted and loved by the team before being fully honest with them.
Yeah, that's so critical. I think one of the things that comes to mind for me in year one, I think I was so excited to make an impact that sometimes you can almost do things too fast and not think through the whole communication strategy, because you want to be first out of the gate, and I want to really prove to my boss that he made a great choice in selecting me as a manager. And sometimes you got to go slow to go fast, and you got to think through organizational impact. Like if you get asked to do like a reorg or change responsibilities, like one thing I would say is just, you're setting up your brand in that year one. So sometimes going slow to go fast might be the smarter way in some cases.
Yeah, Patty, you make a good point. If you're going to implement change, you need to build those internal champions too of the change that you're going to champion. I think a lot of new leaders know it from working deals, but forget it when they're heading up an initiative internally.
Yeah, and find like within the organization that you are managing, like you make a great point about the line between a friend and a colleague and an employee subordinate that's on your team. But like one thing you need is truth tellers too. And I use this sometimes in my skip levels. I'm like, there's going to be no attribution, but like, tell me how your leader's doing. Tell me how the org's feeling, because I can't solve for it if I don't know about it, right? So you want those people who can tell you really what's going on at the ground level, because if you don't know, it's hard to solve for it, right? So you want that open door as well. Thank you so much for all of this. Just another question around hiring and headcount. So if you do have an open headcount that's been identified and you're interviewing for it, how do you best prepare? Kelsey, do you want to start us off on that? Like you've got an open headcount, you're trying to suss out, what is your process?
Yeah. If there's an open leader headcount and you're interviewing for it, I think it's really important to know what the top attributes and priorities are for someone in that profile and for someone to take on in terms of projects or key initiatives, whether that is hiring or something else as a first priority. And then match that to your strengths and experience. Figure out, do the homework, do the thought process of, do I fit today? And if I don't, how do I communicate that and actually put a plan in place? Patty, you mentioned you're not going to focus on your weaknesses, and I completely agree, focus on your strengths. But at the same time, you do need to know what your gaps are and identify how can you close them where relevant.
Yep. Yeah. Lindsay, how about you? Because this is so recent for you, right?
Yeah, as somebody who, was informed about a headcount and went through the interview process earlier this year, I think the best thing you can do is have as strong of a point of view as humanly possible. So learning everything that you can about the business that you're coming into is really just critical. I think I interviewed close to 40 people for my management role, and like I interviewed them, which was lucky. I was internal and I had access to these people, but even if you're external, ask for the people you don't get scheduled with in the interview process. Like, who is your sales partner going to be? Because boy, is that person going to be important to your day-to-day and your success as a whole. Can you speak with a current SE on the team to learn like where the gaps are, how things went last year, what the outlook is for next year? Are there strat SEs in the business that you can talk to about what the initiatives are like at a high level? Because the interview should really not just be about, why you at this company, but why you in this specific headcount, in this specific sales business, and the only way to craft a really strong point of view to make yourself stand out is getting as much information you can about how it exists today, and then coming up with a plan for sort of, what you would implement and what would change. And so the more information, the worst they can say is no, like you can't talk to those people. It's like, okay, well, I'm just trying to do my due diligence here, and come up with a business plan. So for me personally, that was the strongest thing that I did, was every conversation, what's going well, what's not going well, what would you like this to look like next year, and help me build a really strong point of view.
Love those open-ended questions. Another idea I have, and this actually, I've heard from so many different folks, and even like the higher up you go in an organization, you should have this. The person I talked to called it like a walking deck. Like have a deck. It could be, PowerPoint, Google Slides, or it could be just a document that has like your career highlights, some of, the greatest contributions you've had throughout your career, some of the volunteer time off initiative you've done. We've talked about like outside of work and showing leadership outside of work. Have something, because a lot of times there are opportunities at companies for a career showcase. I can tell you a story about a VP level leader who actually got tapped. There was a very senior person in our New York City tower coming in, and they wanted to have a bunch of people come in and do career talks. And this led this person to their next job. And, the jump from here to there was huge. And that career showcase deck and all the preparation that was done was huge. So I think that's amazing. In fact, it inspired me to update mine, because mine was 3 years old, and I'm like, I got to go do it. And, enlist the support of other folks in your network to review it, because I'm asking people to review it. I'm asking people on my team. I'm asking peers, people at other companies, because like you need fresh eyes on it, because you're used to like seeing your stuff, right? But you need to kind of turn the chair and see how someone else would view it. Oh, this is such good dialogue. This is my favorite meeting of, I think, the month. We're going to close out with a question to all the panelists, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. So pop your Q&A in the chat if anyone's got it. And I'm going to give you a break, Lindsay, and go to Kartik on this one. What words of wisdom or any additional advice do you have for aspiring leaders? And just a couple of sentences from each one of you.
Sure, Patty. So I would ask all aspirational leaders to consider all conversations that they have with different stakeholders or people that they interact with on a day-to-day basis, like an interview, right? Because when you are an aspirational leader, you don't know from which direction your opportunity is going to be coming from. So talk about all those business strategies, the initiatives that you're talking about, the POVs that you have, the convictions that you have, right? So this gives you or opens up a lot of opportunities for you. So talk to people, share with them your thought processes, and treat every conversation as your interview. And this will definitely work in your favor and will put you in your best position when you're applying for that role.
Love that. Every conversation could be an interview. You never know, right? It's amazing. Kelsey, how about you? Words of wisdom.
I love that, Kartik. That reminds me of something I saw internally recently too, where conversations on the side both raise someone's impression in the eyes of others, and also lowered it in different conversations depending on the information shared. It's a good reminder of how you share information and who you talk to. From me, I think one of the first things that comes to mind is figure out what your strengths are, be able to articulate them, and aligned to work that helps you maximize them or helps you apply your strengths to maximize the business. That is going to be something that really puts you on a path to success. Don't try to be like everyone else. Don't try to make the team that you have into yourself either. Know your own strengths, respect the strengths of others.
Love that. Lindsay, what can you add there? What's your words of wisdom?
Yeah, I think my biggest one would just be to keep in mind, like, there's no perfect time. I came off of mat leave with my first in February when this role opened up, and my initial response was absolutely not. No way can I take on coming back from work and having a newborn. It's just too much. And, I sat and I thought about it for a couple of days, and, it's not often that these roles come up. And it was like, well, there's no time like the present, and I'm happier than I've ever been at work. And so it all worked out, but, it doesn't have to be the very perfect role or the very perfect time, because that doesn't really exist. And you make it work with what you got. So I just think it's a good reminder.
That is so great you shared that, Lindsay. And in fact, my first manager role was right before I went on mat leave. Yeah. And so for all the folks out there considering, mat leave, pat leave, don't let that dictate, because, life and work integrate, right? And you just need to figure it out. And if you're at the right company, they're going to support you. I'm going to add one thing to it in terms of words of wisdom is forecast what your job's going to look like. As I look at a frontline manager in pre-sales, it looks a lot different today than it did when I first started my career 2.5 decades ago. It's a lot different. I feel like the roles of AEs and SCs are blending a bit. I feel like SE leaders need to continue to be technical, because we are in this world of automation and robotics and artificial intelligence. So I would just encourage everyone, think about what that leader looks like, 6 months, a year down the road, and look at those leaders that you feel like you could emulate, you feel like you like some of the things that they project. And of course, you want to be your authentic self, but learn as much about what they're doing. I love it when people are like, can I shadow you? Can I join a meeting? Can I watch you in a feedback session? Know the role, because I can tell you too, there are some hugely talented people that are in principal solution engineering roles, and they want to just go up that individual contributor ladder. And gosh, that's awesome. There's different paths, and you got to feel comfortable with where you're going. Okay, so I need to see if there's any questions. I know there was a lot of comments in the chat. Courtney, do you see anything in the chat that's a question, or should I just jump to, let's see. I don't
see any in the Q&A box.
Okay.
You can just jump to the other ones if you'd like.
Yeah, okay. So, help us understand, panelists, what strategies can individuals use to hold themselves accountable for the process of their leadership plan throughout the year? We all get uber busy, right? And especially if you're an IC, you're going to work your territory, try to rock your revenue, et cetera, and your client experiences. But what do you do to hold yourself accountable? Who wants to take this?
I can start. That, definitely a tough one. Life comes up, life happens. For me personally, it was picking not necessarily the person I go to for everyday mentorship or month-to-month mentorship, but somebody high up who I really did not want to disappoint. And I knew that if I committed to doing X, or, giving X update to this person, in our next quarterly check-in, I had to do it. There was no negotiation or no, messaging a friend hey, I didn't get to this, like that wasn't an option. So for me, I almost like outsource the accountability of like, I'm going to put it on me. I'm going to, assign myself this work and say, this is what I'm going to do. But then I'm also going to tell someone that is deeply important to me, that feels like I'm competent and I follow through on my word, to really keep me in line. Because, frankly, I need it sometimes, like we all do.
Like an accountability partner, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, I have that too. And also like I use my truth tellers for keep me accountable. Like you gave me this feedback, make sure I'm implementing it, so there's so many different ways to use your network. Does anyone else have any thoughts around holding themselves accountable for moving into leadership? Anything to
I
add?
think one thing that comes to mind is be really honest with your manager if you can about those goals. There's one person in my org I can think of who does this incredibly well, laying out the goals for the 1 year, the 2 year plan, and then making sure that it is a one-on-one topic at least quarterly. This was the progress I made. This was the SMART goals that I broke out for myself. This was the feedback you gave me last quarter, and here's how I've progressed. What should pivot? What should I continue on? And when you bring that to your own leader too, and say this is something that I want to focus on, and you take ownership of setting that quarterly or monthly or biannual cadence, whatever works for you, then one, that builds a great relationship with your leader, but two, you have someone who has that leadership experience who's giving you feedback and cares about your development, supporting you in it.
Oh, I love that. The other question I have is, how do you know if you're on the right track heading toward leadership? Like, are there signs, or how do you know that you're progressing toward this? Do you guys have any thoughts there? I can start if, one thing that I noticed is like my manager would pull me in for things. I would in my skip levels look at problems that are impeding efficiency. And I would say, hey, I noticed this. I'm thinking we might want to build a knowledge office of best practices. I think we're replicating things in different pockets of the org. Here's an idea I have. And then, if you get people nodding their heads and saying, go take that, I mean, that's a big indicator to confidence in you. That kind of goes back to what Lindsay was saying about like systemic problems and trying to figure out what those might be for your organization, your boss, and going to help. Kartik, anything that you noticed in your leadership journey where you're like, yep, I'm doing okay. I'm getting, I'm heading there.
Of course, Patty. So one of the things is how your managers talk to you, right? Or what type of information do they disclose to you, or what type of decisions do they involve you in, right? So when you know that you are being included for those conversations, information sharing, or decision making, you are on track. So that's a very, very good sign that any aspiring leader should watch out for. Sometimes it's very subtle, so it's easy to miss it, but sometimes it's evident too.
Okay. Yeah, I love it. And I think it's just a lot of open-ended and candid conversations with your manager can help, right? And if conversely, like you're seeing you're not on track, like, hey, I really want to get involved in leadership. I'm struggling with figuring out how to get started. Tell me some of the things you're struggling with. I had someone ask me that in a skip level, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, they're like, Patty, what are some of the KPIs that are so critical to you that you're just running out of time to go address? And could I help you on that? Don't be afraid to ask those questions. Another question just came in. This is directly for you, Lindsay. Shout out to Lindsay. I've been told that same advice. How do you actually do that when you don't have headcount? So I think this is referring to like you kind of trying to tee yourself up for that job, but there's not a headcount. So what might you do?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a fine line, because oftentimes the first things you're talking about in a recruiting conversation is things like on target earnings and start date and what you're currently doing now. And so it's something that I've really had to like practice what the talk track is. I always lead with honesty of like, first off, like, I'm really glad we're having this conversation. I'm so happy to be connected. We do not have a head count right now because I don't want there to be any misunderstanding about what the next steps are, or how quickly something will move. So I'm always upfront about that. And then I typically explain like the way that it works at our company is headcounts get released and then they get filled really quickly. So we're constantly trying to have conversations with folks in anticipation of movement on our teams or headcounts opening up. And so oftentimes we'll run through full recruiting cycles, including like a full panel, even though we don't have visibility into that headcount, with the hope and opportunity that one does arise. But if you don't lead with honesty in the beginning, it just creates a mess. So I am always upfront, like, I don't have one right now. This is what I'm hoping for. This is the way it usually works. If, you know, we were to have a great interview session and I would love to hire you, we'll just stay really connected. And, you know, as we get more information about what it looks like for the new year. So I think the most important thing I can say is, don't pretend you have headcount if you do. And there are some people that doesn't work for. They need a job right now, or they are, you know, for whatever reason, you know, the nurturing and, you know, a potential of a role down the line doesn't work for them. And that's totally okay. You know, it might not be a fit for that headcount at that time. I have a very long document, like an Excel document, essentially, where I keep track of who I'm nurturing, you know, who I've sort of passed on from a panel that maybe in a year's time with growth might be a really good fit. And I use that document as my source of truth to make sure that I'm holding up my end of the bargain with the nurturing. But I often put it back on the candidate of like, hey, this was a really great conversation. Like, I really don't have anything right now. I don't have the bandwidth right now to go through a full panel process. Like, why don't you follow up with me in 3 months or 6 months or whatever that is? And then if that person does that, I'm like, wow, yeah, they're really interested in Salesforce or my team or whatever this role is. Yeah, so I'd say that's typically how I handle it. And it's been successful so far, but it doesn't work for every candidate.
Lindsay, I'd love to ask you a follow-up.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Patty. I was just going to ask you a follow-up question on that, Lindsay, which I imagine some of the audience is wondering too. For those people that you take that call with, you lead with the honesty, we don't have a headcount now. Have they typically applied, or are you going and doing outreach to people to build that pool of candidates?
It's both, but I would say it's 75% the latter. I am on LinkedIn. I am asking my folks that I know in my tech circles and my SaaS circles, like, hey, do you know any solution engineers that are strong? Depending on what the profile is that I'm going for, reaching out to folks that are in Salesforce implementation consulting practices. And, you know, often if you're talking to someone who has a job and they're pretty happy, you know, it's fine if something doesn't come up 5-6 months from now. And then oftentimes recruiting does pass us really solid candidates from people that have applied as well. So it's sort of a mix, but I found, at least in this role at this company, a lot of success happens through hiring manager sourced recruiting, because we know what we're looking for. I know what will make a strong solution engineer in this environment. And that has led to my most successful hires in the full 8 months I've been doing this.
No, I think that's a great tip. I think for a lot of new hires, for new managers, they especially lean on recruiting teams to find candidates. What you said, it's been my experience too, Lindsay. You're often able to find the best as the leader.
I'll tell you one quick story and then I'll summarize with some key points. So I literally was up in our Boston office earlier this week, and one of my team members reminded me how she got to us as a solution engineer. She sent a LinkedIn message to my first line manager, and it was very targeted. It was crisp. It was like, I noticed this. I know you're looking for these skills. Here's what I have. And I mean, we reached out because it was that hyper targeted, and we didn't have an opening at that exact moment, but the follow-up was there. So super cool. So try it and look at the profile that you're communicating with too, so you make it targeted. But in summary, I want to summarize a few key points in how to move into leadership. Number one is looking at systemic problems or stretch assignments so that you can do the job that you ultimately want to get into. So that's point one. Number two is with respect to working with mentors, the give value to get value, the ask specific feedback to help you grow. And then point three is, Kartik, I'm going to give a thumbs up to you on this. Every conversation is an interview. You never quite know who you're going to bump into that could hire you. So remember that every conversation's an interview. Please, please link to us. I want to thank Kartik, Kelsey, Lindsay for joining me. Thank you to Courtney, Chris, and the incredible PreSales Collective gang. This was a blast. Please link to us, Slack us in the PreSales Collective channel if you have any follow-up questions, and I'll turn it back to you, Courtney.